With Veltro wiped from the world stage, Commissioner Morgan Lansdale wasted no time reclaiming what remained of their assets. The two derelict cruise liners, once instruments of bioterror, became silent laboratories. Research teams were deployed aboard both vessels. Their assignment was to unravel the mysteries of the T-Abyss virus and develop a viable vaccine. To accomplish this, they were ordered to study the virus's effect on human subjects. The corpses of Veltro's loyalists provided the perfect material. For nearly a year, they cataloged mutations, monitored the viral bloom within flesh, and drafted reports designated for Lansdale's private archive. When the vaccine was fully completed and data delivered, Lansdale initiated the final phase of his plan. With a single command, he sealed every hatch and severed every escape route. The ship's dormant bioweapons, stored in cryogenic chambers far below, awakened as the locks disengaged and alarms fell silent. One by one, containment units opened, flooding the vessel with creatures born of sea and virus. The researchers never realized they were expendable. Their screams, their hurried footsteps, all of it part of Lansdale's design. By morning, the ship would be drifting tombs once more, stripped clean of any witness who might expose him. In the summer of 2005, Jill Valentine and Parker Lucci traveled to the Italian coast. Massive, shapeless carcasses had washed ashore in the days prior. They looked like something dredged from a nightmare. Jill and Parker approached one of the larger remains. Its hide split open to reveal a dark, vicious mass inside. The test confirmed what O'Brien feared. A concentrated sample of the T-Abyss virus was embedded within the creature's tissues. The strange signature matched that of a single source, the Queen Dido, the lost third sister ship to the Znobia. In the weeks that followed the discovery on the Italian coast, O'Brien quietly set his next move into motion. A rumor, deliberately planted, spread to the intelligence network. Veltro had returned, rebuilding itself in a remote European mountain range. The claim was unverified, but potent enough to draw attention. It was exactly what O'Brien needed. BSAA agents Chris Redfield and Jessica Sherwatt were dispatched to investigate a small alpine airfield, Laconia and Mackay Airport, where troubling activity had been reported. What they had found had confirmed the deception had worked. The airport had been converted into a hidden outpost, its hangars filled with the remnants of Veltro's iconography and equipment. The discovery forced O'Brien's hand to dig deeper. He deployed Quint Catchman and Keith Lumley. Their arrival proved immediately fruitful. Inside the shattered remains of a transport plane, they uncovered evidence of a new breed of hunter, one twisted further by the T-Abyss virus. Even more disturbing was the flight footage left behind. On the video, a Veltro operative was torn apart mid-sentence, mauled with such ferocity that the camera shook with his final screams. Clutched in the man's hands was a security token, proof that he had been part of the plane's final mission before disaster struck. Quint and Keith recovered a USB drive from the wreckage and set out towards the crash site. At the shattered cockpit, Quint interfaced with the plane's surviving systems. Amid corrupted files and static, he uncovered coordinates tied to the last operation of the flight. The data pointed unmistakably to a drifting vessel in the Mediterranean, an abandoned cruise liner presumed lost, and according to the logs, Jill Valentine and Parker Lucini were trapped aboard it. While the BSAA pursued the trail in the mountains, another operation was unfolding far from their sight. Orders quietly circulated through the FBC to two of his agents, Rachel Foley and Raymond Vester. Their assignment was to prepare a trap aboard the Queen Zenobia. Inside room 303, they staged the illusion of a recent struggle. A mannequin fashioned to resemble Chris Redfield was bound to a chair, its silhouette arranged just convincingly enough to fool someone approaching from behind. A Veltro flag was raised nearby, the fabric chosen to evoke panic and urgency. The entire scene was designed for one purpose: to draw Jill Valentine deeper into the ship, into a place where she would be alone and vulnerable. While Foley moved through the ship to finalize the setup, she was surrounded in the narrow, waterlogged corridors by warped, shifting shapes. The mutants fell upon her with a sudden, violent hunger. When Jill eventually reached the outer hallway of room 303, Jill retrieved the key from Foley's lifeless body and entered the room. The trap sprung immediately. She and Parker were struck down and left unconscious in the darkness. When they awoke, they regrouped to assess the situation. Their first objective was to restore communication with HQ. As they made their way to the ship's bridge, only to find the equipment destroyed, Raymond Vesser played his role seamlessly. Behind the scenes, he sabotaged the tugboat that had delivered them to the Zabia, severing their only escape route. To Jill and Parker, the destruction appeared to be another act of Veltro aggression. Moments later, Valentine was seized from behind. pinned in a place by an attacker masquerading as a Veltro soldier. She broke free in a surge of instinct, failing to find Vester being alive and far from the helpless cadet Parker believed he was. Before they could confront him, he vanished into the depths of the ship. They soon tracked him down to the auxiliary communication center, arriving only after Vester had already reduced it to a ruin of sparking cables. Feigning ignorance, he insisted that he had simply found it that way, but the truth was laid bare in the melted circuitry. The last reliable link to the outside world was cut. With no other choice, Jill and Parker descended toward the flooded lower decks above the bilge. Rachel Foley, mutated, revitalized by the T-Abyss, stalked them through the half-submerged passages. The two agents pushed forward, fighting their way through both the rising water and infected that haunted it. At last they reached the exterior transmission array. From there, an emergency signal finally pierced the static. O'Brien answered. His message came with a glimmer of hope. Chris Redfield and Jessica Schwartz were already en route, but the Queen's Zenobia had not revealed all of its secrets. O'Brien had engineered Jill's path from the beginning, leaking the ship's coordinates at the precise moment Chris Redfield's signal was jammed in the mountains. The false transmission, crafted to mimic Chris's transponder, ensured that Jill and Parker would be drawn into the vessel's labyrinth long before the truth surfaced. Only after Jill and Parker had fallen victim to the trap did O'Brien establish contact with Redfield. With the deception in place, Chris and Jessica were ordered to follow the coordinates Quint had uncovered, unaware that the trail they were pursuing had been carefully constructed by their own commander. Their helicopter set down on the vessel, shrouded in fog. As they moved quickly through the corridors towards the engine room, they expected any moment to find signs of Jill and Parker, but the truth revealed itself in the details. The architecture, the markings, the layout. They were not aboard the Queen's Zenobia at all. They had landed on her sister ship, the Queen Semiramis. Redfield and Schwartz set a new course for his sister ship, Zenobia, racing towards the vessel where Jill and Parker still fought to survive. Back in Finland, Quint felt an unresolved pull towards the frozen ruins of the airport. Something in the facility's layout, and the data fragments still buried in the systems, suggested there were answers still waiting to be uncovered. Determined to find them, he and Keith returned to the unexplored sections. Tucked among corrupted logs and half-erased surveillance feeds, they uncovered the truth O'Brien had orchestrated. The BSAA director had deliberately fabricated signs of Veltro's return. The false trail, carefully planted across Europe, was a gambit to draw the renewed attention to the FBC and expose their involvement in Terragrigia's fall. It was a dangerous strategy, and now Quint could finally see the outlines of a larger game O'Brien was playing. But the revelation came at a cost. Almost the moment the data was decrypted, a distant drone of approaching aircraft rolled across the icy airfield. Lansdale, aware that the investigation had reached too close to the truth, acted without hesitation. A precision airstrike descended upon the airport, missiles streaking across the sky, erupting in fires that tore open hangars, and engulfed the complex in a storm of metal and flame. The ground convulsed beneath Keith and Quint as the shockwaves ripped through the abandoned structures. They sprinted through the collapsing terminals, dodging falling beams and debris. Only by chance and agility did they hurl themselves clear of the final blast, sliding across ice as the airport was swallowed in a plume of fire. When the flames finally settled, the evidence Lansdale feared was erased, but Quint and Keith had survived. On the Queen's Zenobia, moments after Jill Valentine and Parker re-established communication with the BSA headquarters, the situation deteriorated with startling speed. O'Brien revealed grim news. The Regia Solis, the same solar weapon that annihilated Terragrigia, had been reactivated. Its beam was now aligning with the Zenobia, preparing to reduce the ship to molten debris. Amid the rising panic, Quint broke through to them with a plan. Drawing upon the remnants of Veltro's own technology, he instructed Jill and Parker to reroute one of the UAVs, and to use its chaff to lure the Regia Solis targeting system away from the Zenobia. Colossal beam fired, locked onto the UAV's decoy signal, and obliterated the drone in a single pulse of searing light. The destruction of the UAV triggered a violent shockwave across the surface of the sea, racing outward until it slammed into the ship's hull. With water flooding the lower decks and alarms blaring throughout the corridors, Jill and Parker fought their way towards the relative safety of the casino level. There, in the dim flicker of the emergency lighting and the smell of brine, a lone figure awaited them, Ray Vester. His presence and the deliberate phrasing of his questions hinted at knowledge far deeper than surface-level chaos. He knew of the city, he knew of the conspiracy buried beneath the FPC's operations, and he was moments away from revealing more, when a sudden gunshot tore through the casino's chamber. Vester staggered, crimson spreading across his chest as Jessica arrived with Chris Redfield. The mask was removed. Injured and fading fast, he leaned close enough to whisper a final truth to Parker. One last piece of conspiracy buried beneath layers of deception. Jessica was the FBC mole inside the BSAA. Moments later, Vester collapsed. With the ship buckling under the assault of the Regia's Solus shockwave, it became immediately clear that time was running out. The ship was dying. Understanding the stakes, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine split from Parker and Jessica, each pair taking on a different crisis. Redfield and Valentine is headed towards the ship's laboratory, determined to prevent the T-Abyss virus from spilling into the open sea. If the ship sank while its containment systems were unstable, the Mediterranean would become a stage for disaster beyond imagining. The other two raced upward towards the bridge. Their mission was the opposite: stabilize the ship long enough to keep it afloat. But the moment they reached the command deck, the truth revealed itself in motion rather than words. Sherwood had not come to save anyone. She moved straight for the consoles with a purpose, intent not on stopping the catastrophe, but ensuring the last traces of evidence tying the FPC to Terragrigia's fate were erased forever. Before she could finish her task, Lucinia confronted her, only for another figure to step from the shadows. Raymond Vester, very much alive, his earlier death prevented by Kevlar hidden beneath his uniform. Sherwood reacted before Lucinia could restrain her. A single shot rang across the bridge. Lucinia staggered back, wounded, collapsing against the control panels. The injury confirmed everything. Sherwood had no intention of allowing the truth to surface. She then activated the ship's self-destruct system, sealing the ship's fate. The countdown began immediately. She then slipped away from the smoke-filled corridors, escaping before the blast sequence progressed too far. Vester, still weakened, followed her out. Meanwhile, deep within the ship's laboratory complex, Chris and Jill worked through the flooded passages until a flicker of blue light illuminated the darkness. A monitor cracked to life. On the screen appeared Commissioner Morgan Lansdale. Through the uplink, he laid bare the truth. The city's annihilation had been no accident, no failure of containment. It had been a deliberate sacrifice, orchestrated to win funding and global relevance for the FBC. Every life lost, every square mile of city vaporized, had been a stepping stone in his descent. Realizing what must be done, Valentine followed the instructions left behind by the doomed researchers, the T-Abyss reacting violently before collapsing, neutralized by the antidote. In that moment, the chain of infection that had threatened to spill into the Mediterranean was severed, but the ship was past saving. Explosions shook the deck plates, Sherwood's sabotage accelerating the inevitable collapse. As they fought their way upward through the burning corridors, Chris and Jill came upon Parker, sprawled on the shattered catwalk, grievously wounded. Parker managed to relay what remained of his strength to one final purpose, revealing Jessica's betrayal and confirming Vester's warning. The structure beneath him buckled. Chris reached for him, Jill pulling to assist, but the flames surged upward, and the metal gave way. Parker plunged into the inferno below. There was no time to mourn. The ship was collapsing around them. The two raced to the front deck as the bulkheads twisted and fell away. Pilot Kirk Madison maneuvered his VTOL helicopter into position for extraction, but before they could reach it, a monstrous shape tore free from the sinking vessel. Malakada, the colossal T-Abyss serpent, rose from the waves, his massive tentacles slamming into the deck in a frenzy. The creature, a remnant of the ship's horror, stood between them and escape. Working together, Chris and Jill engaged the beast, dodging its thrashing limbs as the ship groaned beneath their feet. Through concentrated fire and the ship's own failing architecture working against the mutant, Malakada finally succumbed, slipping back into the dark waters. Exhausted, the two agents were hauled aboard Madison's helicopter. Just as the ship reached its breaking point, the ship's hull burst open, flames extinguished as the vessel vanished beneath the waves. Aboard the helicopter, Redfield and Valentine finally allowed themselves a moment to breathe. The Mediterranean rolled beneath them in the dark, unbroken waves as they listened to O'Brien's final transmission. The director revealed the truth behind his elaborate deception. Veltro's supposed return, the leaked coordinates, the manipulation of events that had drawn both the BSAA and the FBC into open conflict. It had all been a necessary gambit to expose the rot within the FBC's leadership. With Quint's recovered data confirming the last missing threads, O'Brien directed them towards the Queen Dido, the sunken third ship that had harbored the origins of the T-Abyss nightmare. No sooner had the transmission ended than O'Brien was seized. Lansdale, having finally realized that the web tightening around him was of O'Brien's making, moved swiftly. The commissioner painted him as a terrorist collaborator, accusing him of orchestrating biohazard incidents alongside Veltro. The reversal was immediate. With O'Brien silenced and in custody, only one path remained to uncover the truth: find Jack Norman, the leader of Veltro, and retrieved the evidence he had once used to blackmail Lansdale. Following the coordinates, Redfield and Valentine descended into the ruins of the Queen Dido. The ship had become a tomb suspended in black water. Every step forward revealed remnants of a missing year. Mutated globsters clinging to bulkheads. The pale corpses of FBC agents drifting in stagnant chambers. The atmosphere grew heavier as they pushed deeper. Norman's last broadcast had hinted at both obsession and betrayal. When they finally located him, the truth was worse than the reports. Jack Norman had endured far beyond what any human should. Through repeated self-injections of the T-Abyss, he had clung to life by sheer fanaticism. His body and mind twisted by equal parts virus and anguish. The lines between memory and delusion had blurred until all that remained was his hatred for Lansdale, and the dream of a justice that never arrived. Mutated beyond recognition, Norman attacked at the last spark of his broken idealism, forcing the two agents into a brutal confrontation. The creature fought with the strength of a dying zealot who refused to be forgotten. Redfield and Valentine pushed back with equal resolve, fighting not just for survival, but to bring the truth into the light. At last, Norman collapsed. His monstrous form faded and his human identity flickered back for a final instant. The recording device he had guarded so viciously fell into Valentine's hands. The evidence, every confession, every exchange, every detail linking Lansdale to Terragrigia's fall. Back on the surface, Valentine transmitted the data directly to headquarters. The reaction was immediate. Lansdale's narrative shattered, and the walls of his manufacturer authority crumbled. The FBC commissioner was taken into custody on charges of orchestrating bioterrorism. Disgraced and exposed, he was stripped of all the power he had used to kill hundreds to obtain.